thanks for coming on the show today. Um, Currently, we're sitting in the Civic Opera Building, which I think is also known as Insull's Throne.
That's right.
And the only reason I know that is because maybe 2 decades ago, I was on one of the tours, the architectural boat tour that Wendella does.
It is a highlight of our tour.
Yeah, and I literally call this building the Throne. I had to admit I had to Google what's the story about it, but I think it's Samuel Insull was from New York, didn't get the promotion to president that he wanted at General Electric. So when he came here, he was involved with the building of this building, and so wanted the throne with the back.
Makes it facing west.
Yeah, facing west.
Yeah. One of the highlights of the tour.
So it'll be a point for me to say, well, this is a pro-Chicago tour, pro-Chicago podcast. This is not an anti-New York podcast, but I thought it'd just be kind of a fun way to start.
Yeah, so we try not to be petty with our architecture, but over the years, things have happened. So.
Awesome. So Andrew, for today, would love to dive into a little bit about the business, then touch on some of the things about your role, some of the things in the market, some of the behind the scenes trends that we're seeing, that sort of thing.
I love talking about it.
Well, why don't we get started there? So have at it.
Well, a few things I'd love to start off with is that this is Wendella Tours and Cruises 90th anniversary season.
Oh, wow.
So giving architecture tours, cruises, private events, ferry service on the river, water taxi service on the river for 90 years now. So company starts in 1935. There is a Swedish immigrant. His name is Albert Borgström. He's the grandfather of our current owner. And he's a carpenter at Navy Pier, and he finds an abandoned wooden diesel yacht called the Wendella. And this was in the middle of the Great Depression. So people were abandoning these craft at what was a business called Chris Craft on Navy Pier. They refurbished boats. They were carpenters. And he acquired this boat and started giving tours on the river in Lake Michigan. This was the first time in history that somebody was giving tours of Chicago. Not to mention this was on a boat as well. And it's funny because we actually have a picture of the late 30s at Navy Pier that we found on eBay. And it has this giant sign. It's so funny how marketing has changed. It says, "Come ride the palatial Wendella, be snooty and part of the upper crust." That was really what the sign says. And you can see all these people walk around. You can imagine it's in the middle of the Great Depression. And there's this Swedish guy on the pier, which wasn't even a tourist attraction. And he's yelling at people to come and take a boat ride for 25 cents. So
be snooty.
Be snooty, part of the upper crust. And so that's the late 30s marketing. But what an incredible and industrious man this was, and building from one vessel, wooden diesel yacht, up to now we have 9 boats. We're building a 10th this year. We've had several vessels in between that we've built and acquired and then retired, but the business has really evolved. There's now multiple competitors, and the Chicago River Architecture Tour, whether it's ours or one of our competitors, is the most popular thing to do, we believe, in the world for tourists.
Yeah.
And actually, TripAdvisor would tell you that their online travel agency platform, Viator, sells more Chicago Architecture Tour tickets than Vatican entry tickets.
Wow.
It is the #1 most popular ticket sold on their site. Ours is the best, but our competitors do a good job. do a good job too. So
that is incredible. Yeah. So I want to go back to the upper crust and getting started and kind of the state of Chicago at that time, and also just the river itself. Like, it has gone through different personalities.
Sure.
I've noticed, and I've heard many of stories of Chicago and why it flows a certain way and what type of contents were in the river, and and kind of getting into that.
Yeah.
But would love to know, some of the ways, and maybe we don't go all the way back to 90 years ago, but some of the things that you have seen or the stories that on how it's changed over the years. I would imagine the business is different now than it was then.
Yeah, well, certainly the Chicago River is much cleaner than it was at one time. We know that during the Great Chicago Fire, the river itself caught fire. Right. So, you can imagine the river's on fire. Put water on it. Well, it's on the water. Yeah. But there's been an incredible effort since the reversal of the Chicago River to clean it up, and it really took off in the last 20 years or so, which I feel like is really when environmentalism sort of became mainstream. I know when I was a child, there wasn't much talk of things like plastics and greenhouse gas emissions, and that really accelerated as I got into my teenage years in like the late 90s and 2000s. And really, the cleaning of the river really coincides with how the city of Chicago itself was really kind of in decay in the 70s and 80s. My parents talk about this a lot.
Yep.
And then really started going through this sort of renaissance where all the millennials wanted to move back into the city, whereas the boomers took them all out to the burbs. Millennials all moved back in, focusing on things like finance and technology. But everything really started to improve, in the 2000s. But then when Rahm Emanuel came onto the scene, and he was the first mayor to really give the river the recognition it has. He said, Lake Michigan's our front yard, the river's our backyard.
Huh.
We're going to build this river walk, and we're going to bring people down to this river. Community organizations like Friends of the Chicago River got a big boost. The visibility of the river got a big boost, and it was really good for our clientele and the health of the river.
Yeah.
So, but things I've seen. Here's the truth of it: is that Chicago's sewer system is antiquated.
Mm-hmm.
So our storm water and sewage water combines in the sewer. So when there's a massive rainfall event and the sewers are going to overflow, and this happens pretty frequently, they have to release that sewage into the Chicago River.
Mm-hmm.
This happens probably a handful of times a year. They built the big tunnel so-called project in the south suburbs, a giant reservoir to house this extra water to prevent these discharge events. But the improvement's been nominal. This still happens multiple times a year. And in fact, certain years in 2013, it was so bad they had to open the lock and re-reverse the flow of the Chicago River into Lake Michigan, and it was terrible.
Yeah.
I don't know what the solution is. I can't say if climate change is going to continue to make this trend worse, but the river is much cleaner than it was when I was a member of the Marine crew, where if you fell in the river, you would have to go to the immediate care clinic and get antibiotics, get your ear drops.
Yep.
Nowadays, I don't think that'd be needed if you were to fall in the river.
I mean, in fact, today on a sunny day in Chicago, there's a line of people signing up to take kayaks out and all kinds of stuff. I've seen some interesting stuff in the river.
Interesting
lately.
Is a nice word. We use a different word for it, but
But yeah. We're talking about the floating hot tubs or
floating hot tubs, floating mattresses, the jet packs. I mean, every day there's something new on the river.
That's awesome.
It's insane.
So starting from a place of giving tours, right?
Yeah.
And that was my first interaction with your organization. As I know today, tours, I can see that expanding into cruises.
Yeah.
And then there's also the taxi.
That's right.
I would love to know the evolution of how that came to be and just like, what are some of the inner workings of this?
So for, probably 75 years, it was just the tours, the architecture tours. Mm-hmm. And these boats giving these architecture tours would break in the morning and afternoon to shuttle people from Michigan Avenue to the train station right across the river here. So it's called the Wendella Commuter Cruiser. So the one boat is doing both things, shuttling people back and forth, and then doing the architecture tours. Now, even way back before then, when Wendella was just doing the architecture tours on the river and on the lake, there really wasn't much to see. We have brochures from the 1940s, 50s, and it's funny to read that the Drake Hotel was one of the biggest highlights of the lake tour. And the Chicago Armory Club is another highlight. And you're thinking, what are these people even looking at out here? But nevertheless, it was very popular. Mid-40s come around, and this is the first time Wendella is doing transportation. So the U.S. in the middle of World War II, Wendella's vessels are all federally registered vessels, and we're all merchant mariners. And Wendella was pretty much the way the story goes, for lack of a better term, drafted into service almost, and started bringing sailors from Northwestern train station, which was Ogilvy and Union train station. At the time, it was Northwestern train station. It was bringing sailors out to Navy Pier. This is the first time the Wendella fleet is doing transportation. And they're bringing sailors out to Navy Pier, and they're training out there to be mechanics in the Navy. They're training out there to take off and land on aircraft carriers. And several, tens of thousands of pilots actually trained there, including George H.W. Bush and others that ultimately ended up going to face the Nazis or the Japanese in the Pacific or Atlantic. So Chicago really had a great role there in the war effort, and Wendella did too. So then time goes on. Wendella, the war ends. Wendella starts doing the commuter cruiser in between its architecture tours, and then really maybe in the early 2000s, we add the cruise component, and the difference is that there's really a light narration or no narration.
Okay.
So things like fireworks, sunset, wine and cheese cruise, beer and barbecue cruise, and really this is an attempt to offer something to more locals or those that want a more authentic kind of vibe.
Yep.
And that's really been one of our main themes as of late, is trying to be more authentic and connected to Chicago. And we do that in many ways, but the cruises is one way. The wine and cheese cruise is like a happy hour event.
Mm-hmm.
We try to market that more to locals. So that's the cruise versus the tour component. And then the water taxis evolved over the years. 1999, Wacker Drive gets torn up. They're going to resurface it. The water taxi starts running transportation full time as a Wacker Drive alternative, and just continued from there.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So it was that construction project that
started from just morning and afternoon rush hour service on the tour boats, to we're going to do this full time. Wendella acquires 2 boats. It's the Wendella River Bus at the time it was called.
Okay.
And I actually started as a deckhand on the river bus.
Yep.
And went from Ogilvy and Union train station to Michigan Avenue, stopped in between at LaSalle, and then on weekends went to River East over by Navy Pier.
Oh, wow.
And then after the Wacker Drive is reconstructed, it just continues on and went from, a 6-month to a 9-month to now we're at about a 9-month, service. Maybe
That's
even
incredible.
around one day.
Really?
So, yeah.
So, and this might be a hard stat to produce, but I always thought it'd be cool to take a helicopter to work. It'd be cool to take a boat to work.
It would be. It's such a better quality of commute. It works on the river. We get questions all the time. Can you bring the boat up to Wilmette and bring us down the lake? It's not as practical when you're going those large lengths and when you're on the lake, but on the river, it's very reliable. The river traffic does slow us down, especially on the weekends, but it is the best quality of commute.
Yeah.
I mean, as opposed to being on a bus or being in a taxi, our biggest competition is really walking.
Yeah.
When it comes to commuters downtown. So.
I could see that. Now, in terms of I'll start by saying the tours, right?
Yep.
To me is just a thing you do if you're in Chicago.
Right.
And I am probably being 100% accurate by saying anytime I've hosted someone from outside of Chicago,
sure,
and I'm tasked with let's find something for them to do, I either send them there or I take them there.
It really is the best thing to do. You get to see the city. You get to be on a boat, which people enjoy. People get to see the river. They get to see the lake. It's the quintessential Chicago experience. The comments we get are just fantastic. People really love the product. They say things like, Lake Michigan looks like an ocean. They think you can see across it.
Yeah.
They love the river. In cities like New York and San Francisco, the river is around the city. Our river cuts right through the heart of it. It'd be like if in New York, Broadway was a river.
Right.
And you really don't have this type of layout anywhere else. So the cruise is spectacular. The architecture tours are spectacular. It is the best thing to do.
Yeah, I totally agree. And so questions, you mentioned a couple of times, I didn't know this about your history, that you started in the thick of it in terms of your role in the organization.
Right.
I eventually want to navigate towards, you clearly have a depth of history on both Wendella and Chicago in general.
Yep.
Tour guides are amazing. Love to know where you started and what you do now.
Well, I'll tell you about. So the current owner of the company, who is the grandson of the Swedish guy that set this up in the 30s, is my godfather. Okay. So when I was a teenager, me and my cousin first started running brochures for the company. I remember Trump Tower was being reconstructed. There was the Sun-Times building was getting torn down. Started running brochures. Grew up going on the boats. My father's 40th birthday party was a surprise party on the boat, and Bozo the Clown came down. Our grandparents' 50th anniversary party was on the boat, and we went on a lake cruise. So we were very familiar with it. Once you're 18 and able to become a deckhand, I started off in the Marine crew on the river bus. Okay. And at the time, the training at the time, it's funny, I thought at the time I considered it to be pretty robust training. Now I considered it to be very basic. which goes to show you how much we've improved our safety and security posture over the last 10 to 20 years. But would work through the summers, and then went to school, went to college during the year, and then worked on campus during the year. And every summer would come back and would work for Wendella.
Yep.
And then by the time I graduated, the river bus had evolved to the Chicago water taxi, and they were looking for a full-time manager, and the role was available for me. So that's when I started.
That's awesome.
Wendella's history is fantastic, and the stories you hear from the so-called old timers are just amazing. And the evolution of this business, where it was and where it's come now, is just it's really humbling, and it's great to be a part of it. They'll tell stories from the 70s where they would do 3 architecture tours, go get a drink at Billy Goat's, and come back to another tour. Things you can't even imagine, that type of behavior now.
Right.
I mean, it's interesting to hear these stories. Actually the original Wendella was sank because a guy was driving a barge drunk down the river and hit it. No passengers were on it. It was docked, but it sank. And I said, so what was the, what happened to this? Insurance, the company paid for it. And it was like, this was the 50s.
Yeah.
It was just open. It was like the Wild West. No, he just drove off, and they cursed at each other and gave each other the finger, and that was it. It's like, wow.
In fact, a quick sidebar. I've always heard that the laws are different on water versus land. Does that play into the river at all?
Yeah, I mean, not to get too technical, because we can go on and on for we could have a whole other podcast about this, but the Chicago River is a federally navigable waterway.
Okay.
So federal law trumps local laws on the river. And this is a point of contention, especially in the last few years, as business on the river expands.
Yeah.
I think the city would like to have greater oversight of what goes on, especially from a taxation perspective. But it is a federally navigable waterway. There's benefits to that. But laws are different on the federal waterway than on like a lake or even on land.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So federal. That's interesting.
So speaking to the thing, grabbing a drink after the tour, you could drive a car with 0.08,
sure,
blood alcohol level. With a boat, you could not at all.
Oh, really?
No, you cannot have even a drop of alcohol. If you blew on a breathalyzer or had an oral test, the slightest blood alcohol level would show up, and that'd be grounds for immediate termination, and your license would probably be terminated as well.
Yeah, it's good to hear. I appreciate hearing there's a heightened safety on the water.
Yeah.
I'm in a car more often, so I almost wish that it was
sure.
that it was that direction as well. Very cool. So sorry for the sidetrack on the regulation. It's something I was always curious with. Yeah. So back to your role. So you got started. We're now at the point where Chicago Water Taxi launched.
So I become the manager of the water taxi, and at this point, it's overwhelmingly personnel management.
Okay.
It's making the schedule. It's training the employees. It's hiring and firing. There's an HR component to it at the time. And really most of my day is taken up with, personnel issues, quality control, training, things of that nature. The role kind of evolves over the years to become a little bit more corporate. The Wendella team grows. I also took on another role as kind of the director of sales on our sales and marketing team.
Okay.
Sort of these dual roles, and it's interesting because I have 2 different titles: the Chicago Water Taxi Chief of Operations and Wendella's Director of Sales. Sometimes it can be confusing. The roles don't overlap a lot; they do a little bit.
Yeah.
But depending on the function, I'll kind of maybe pick and choose a title, depending on who I'm talking to, what I need, or what business I'm trying to do. But it's a great business to be a part of.
Yeah.
The response from our customers is overwhelmingly positive, and I just love talking about it. People find it so interesting.
Yeah.
When I talk about what we do and where we've come from and where we want to go. So
absolutely. Yeah. So I would stay focused on Wendella for a little bit.
Sure.
Versus the water taxi. So what are some of the shifts that you're seeing in I'll say Chicago tourists, since I know that caters a lot to the tourism. We've got the Riverwalk now is something, I feel like last summer I hadn't been there in like a summer.
Yep.
And it was triple the size, and I was absolutely floored.
Yeah, so we're seeing a few things. Chicago leading up to the pandemic was becoming more of a tourist-oriented city. You know, hotels were expanding. There were more inbound flights, more inbound visitors. The stats coming out of Choose Chicago, which tracks this, were trending in the right direction. COVID happens, and then we know how bad that was. But then what we see afterwards is an extremely remarkable recovery, and this is driven by many factors. But one is that we're not an international destination.
Right.
And it was interesting how for years we lamented this fact until COVID hit. And then we saw that we recovered far quicker than New York, San Francisco, Seattle, places that are international destinations.
Interesting.
Because Americans started traveling right off the bat. We are still seeing this trend where American destinations like Chicago are still doing much better and have surpassed pre-pandemic numbers, as there's places like San Francisco and New York are still seeing hotel rooms and inbound flights not reach those 2019 levels yet.
Yeah.
You know, I can go on and on about the strengths of our city, but I think what we're seeing is that the tourism market is expanding quickly. We had not just Wendella, but our competitors, the hotels, have had the last few years each year has been our best year over year in terms of inbound visitors.
Really?
Inbound traffic. Yep. And for the hotels as well.
Yeah.
We're seeing NASCAR events. We're seeing concerts back. We're having, you know, the biggest political rally if the DNC was in Chicago. And these events all went off very well without a hitch. Now, one of the negative trends we've seen since the end of COVID is that the work from home status of a lot of downtown's workers is become permanent, semi-permanent. We're seeing Tuesday through Thursday, people are back in the office at near pre-pandemic levels, maybe not quite, but close to it.
Yep.
Mondays and Fridays, there's nobody working down here. But the city is still crowded because it's all tourists.
Yeah.
So this has changed a lot of the way that we think about our products, especially the water taxi. And we've had to amend our schedule to become more tourist focused. And now we've cut down a lot of rush hour departures. We've increased non-rush hour weekend departures. We've increased departures to Chinatown, which is more tourist oriented. And our numbers are surpassing pre-pandemic numbers. So I think that Chicago really needs to lean into its strength as a tourism hotspot. O'Hare is the most connected airport in the United States.
Correct.
You know, direct flights from every American city. Chicago is more affordable than the coasts are, and everything can be done in a walking distance down here. It's not like LA or Orlando where you need a car to get around. You could walk everywhere, and we have a lot to offer. So you know, we're very confident over these next few years. We're feeling good. We're building a new boat. You know, our biggest concern is just which I think a lot of people talk about is what's going to happen to all these office buildings over the next 10 years.
Right.
We hear stories of long-term leases coming due and people not re-signing and buildings handing over the keys to their lenders.
Yep.
You know, what does that mean for us? And just the one more thing I want to add is that we talk about the Magnificent Mile a lot. You know, people aren't going to go there for high-end retail anymore. You can go to Nordstrom's in Old Orchard and Skokie. You can go to Woodfield and shop at Tiffany's. So really the Mag Mile is trying to reimagine itself and is focusing more on experiences instead of shopping. And I hope that they continue to do this. We are active in the Mag Mile Association, but there's really a lot of strengths of focusing on the experiences over the retail. But I really just hope that they are open-minded to all experiences and not focusing only on certain types, because, you know, as much as people might not like things like casinos and dispensaries, I mean, things like this really are going to draw people in. So we got to be open-minded towards everything.
Yeah, I think open-minded is key. And you mentioned experiences, which is very interesting. You talk about going to Nordstrom's at Old Orchard Mall or versus downtown Magnificent Mile. It is an entirely different experience to be walking down that street, breathing the Chicago air, you know, and all the activity, the hustle and the bustle. It's exciting, right? And I think the businesses that are really adapting to that being a experience instead of a transaction, because even before COVID, right, retail was obviously challenging against. There's no, the most optimal way to buy something is online, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So why have a store? It's because of the experience.
That's right. And you go to places like the Starbucks Roastery and places like Eataly, and you know, these aren't just regular grocery stores or cafes. And this is really what they got to lean into. So we're seeing the Museum of Ice Cream and these new attractions pop up. We hope and think that'll continue.
Yeah.
But, Chicago is going to have to continue to reimagine and reinvent itself. Retail the way as we know it is going to be going out the window. But I do wonder about these office buildings. They're going to have to repurpose it like they did here.
Yeah, 100%.
So we work with a lot of real estate developers who, before the pandemic, came to us and said, we're building these giant buildings on the river. We want a water taxi stop here. And we told them how easy it would be to do so. You just need a seawall. We'll put some fendering up, some cleats, and a hinge gate, and that's really all we need. And now they're calling us back and saying, well, are we still going to do this? And our question is, well, Salesforce, you just announced that you were permanent at home, 5 days a week.
Right.
So what are we going to stop there for?
Right.
So these conversations have changed a lot. But I do wonder what's going to happen, because that is a true story. They have this beautiful tower, one of the best I've ever seen.
Yep.
And they announced everyone's at home full time. Maybe they'll go back on that. Maybe they won't. But if they don't, what happens then to this giant tower they have that is totally empty?
Totally.
And what'll that mean for us downtown?
Totally. And I've had folks in the commercial real estate, Chicago commercial real estate market on this podcast. And one of the things that they point out is, sure, it's a thing. We've got the big buildings. I think a lot of the armchair quarterbacks say, turn them into condos. And no one's thinking about what it's like to put a kitchen in, 50 kitchens, a floor.
Easier said than done.
Easier said than done. And so I think one of the good things is everyone is looking at it and thinking about it, right?
Yeah.
It is a thing. It is being discussed. And therefore, people are starting to build strategies around it. But it also comes into another one of the themes of this podcast is the diversity of Chicago's economy.
Sure.
And so if you take a look, so I'm in the tech world, right? We've got a very flexible policy and we kind of always did. That's just kind of, you got to do that in technology. I have friends at law firms. They're there every day, right?
Sure.
You can kind of go down industry by industry by industry on who's adopting what trends.
Yeah.
And I think that insulates us a little bit from versus San Francisco, which is predominantly tech, right?
Right.
So if that industry shifts, especially related to commercial real estate and everything else, and we've seen that, right? We've seen what's happened there in New York with being heavily in the financial services. So I think that's an interesting thing where the resilience of Chicago comes out of that diversity.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah.
And I think the other interesting thing, which is, again, maybe for another podcast, is the shifts in corporate culture that we're seeing, right? You see a lot of this, professional services is getting, a lot of people are having the conversation that the junior level jobs of doing spreadsheets and research that used to kind of prepare you and get exposure to those upper level people. First, the argument was they're not in the same space anymore. That's going to be drastic. Now, AI gets tossed into there too.
Sure.
And so what happens without that training ground as these other things? So I think we'll find a balance. Again, I think our city is probably positioned better than most.
I think so.
From a aspect of resiliency, but it's interesting to hear that.
Because, and you have these beautiful pieces of land they want to develop, things like Sterling Bay on the north side,
right?
Dude, Lincoln Yards, and Related Midwest has this large plot of land on the south side of the city. And at first they wanted to do mixed use. And then it was, well, no, maybe we'll do, the White Sox Stadium. Who knows what they might try to do there, but you could see how they're adjusting their plans now to fit this new reality. But, the focus will have to be on things that'll draw people that aren't office buildings.
Right.
I think housing could be great. And if not housing, then, things like attractions, stadiums, casinos, tourist attractions,
100%.
Things of that nature, and that's where they'll have to go. So
being a destination. And in fact, you mentioned Italy before. I have planned family trips to Italy.
It's fantastic.
I've never planned a family trip to
Jewel.
to Jewel. I love Jewel, but
that's how it is. So the Mag Mile Association is like a chamber of commerce for Michigan Avenue.
Correct.
And they kind of talk about this idea a lot, and really that's where it's going.
Interesting.
And we have to be open-minded, trying to pigeonhole, like you said, the diversification is key.
Yep.
When I hear, well, this proposal isn't in a character in the Mag Mile, I don't like hearing those things. If someone's going to set up a business that could potentially bring, tens of thousands of customers and foot traffic into the mile.
Exactly. We got to figure out what people are reacting to.
That's right.
And go that direction. So experience is important. I've experienced your experience.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Let's hear it.
The tour guides on those boats.
They're great, aren't they?
It's more than just information. And I'd argue I've been on the boat with the same tour guide different times, and I get different stories. Where are you finding these people?
It's funny. There was a point in my career where I was doing interviews for new hires, and sometimes I wouldn't know if someone was interviewing for a potential job until we'd sit down in the interview room. But when you would shake their hand, I would know immediately if they were interviewing to be a tour guide.
Yeah.
Because they immediately are talkative, they're presentable, they're like actors. Most of these tour guides are highly seasonal, so they have other jobs, a lot of teachers. We have a lot of people that are in the entertainment business.
Okay.
Actors, actresses, comedians, singers, people who are good with performative arts. And how do they become a tour guide? If they get hired, we have an in-house training program.
Okay.
It's pretty rigorous. It's pretty extensive. But I mean, really, that's it. It's a very desirable position, highly desirable. It is competitive in the sense that we have far more applicants than we have spaces available.
Really?
But they work really hard. They're fantastic. They're great. We encourage them to be authentic. We encourage them to pepper some of their own experiences in. We like having people that are from here, act like they're from here, sound like they're from here, present themselves like they're from here.
Yeah.
Have personal stories about, this is my favorite pizza place. This is where you get the best hot dog in the city. We want that authenticity, and we get it, and they're fantastic.
Yeah.
So
it's I think Warner Brothers' phrase was they wanted everything to be enlighten, educate, and entertain. I think were the 3 E's that they go by. And I'll tell you, it's a comedy act.
Yeah, they're great.
And at the same time, I'm getting hit with information that I never knew. I'm always walking around. I'm still carrying the thrown comment about Civic Opera House around.
Sure. Our competitor has the architecture foundation docents.
Okay.
And when you're on their boats, it's like you're in a college lecture.
Sure.
It's like the scene from Ferris Bueller.
Yeah.
People pay twice the money to fall asleep in the corner. Our tour guides, meanwhile, are making noise and jokes, and they're really entertaining people, and they're giving people great information. But we love that vibe on the boat.
100%.
We have a lot of great people. We've had retired cops with thick Chicago accents. We have young urban people from the inner city, people from all over that have done a great job. And like I said, a lot of them, come from, backgrounds where they've done a lot in the performative arts, whether it's their trade or just their passion. And that obviously helps because they're up in front of people talking and answering questions and whatnot.
Right. So, and then you provide some of this, because there are some quintessential things you say as you go by the building. So there's a training program.
There is. So they're not following an exact script, but there are, for lack of a better term, all the points that they have to hit.
Yeah.
And each tour differs a little bit. The river architecture tour is very extensive with all the architecture on the river. The lake and river tour just kind of abbreviates the river because you're splitting that time with Lake Michigan and the river.
Yeah.
We do a 45-minute tour, more for people with young kids or shorter time spans available. And that's also more abbreviated. So they kind of adjust. The route could be different.
Right.
We might go east first one day, and based on river traffic, we might go west first the other day. And they do a great job. They know exactly, what points they have to hit. They know what jokes people react to. I learn something new almost every time I go on that tour. People say, "Don't you have it memorized?" But like you said, I don't, because they'll say new things every time.
Every time.
And I try to go on a boat ride at least once a week when I can.
Oh, really?
So, yeah, I do. 45-minute tour is a newer product, and it really helps for us who are busy in the office to get down there and get out there and see the product and see the people and do that quality control and see how our customer service and see how our strategies are working on the ground. The water taxi and the 45-minute tour makes that a lot easier to kind of view that. But I'm on it all the time for personal reasons. My friends love it. My family loves it. They come to town. I always bring them on. I never miss a river dine cruise. I never miss a fireworks on Memorial Day weekend, the first of the year. So,
Yep.
These are just things that are just part of my life. And I love experiencing them, and part of it is seeing how everyone's doing. So,
well, and I can't think off the top of my head of a business that's more intertwined in the cultural aspects of Chicago,
sure,
right, than what you all are doing. I mean, a couple sentences ago, I think you mentioned Billy Goat and Bozo the Clown, and like these are all like Chicago staples, right?
Right. Yeah.
Kind of built into that experience. So the keeping up with that history.
Yeah.
I forget the name of the building, but there's a building on the river that the foundation is smaller than the footprint is smaller than the rest of the building.
Sure.
And I was educated by one of your tour guides that they've got big mobile water towers that kind of move from side to side that help balance it. And I won't quiz you on this.
I believe it's at Lake Street.
It is at Lake Street.
It's a newer building there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So my question is there a historian? Like, how are you guys staying on top of all this information?
Yeah, so not necessarily a historian, but I guess it would be an unofficial historian that every time a new building is built, we'll research it, sometimes get in touch with the people who've been involved with it, and then we'll provide those materials and add them into our training. Now, what's funny is we get calls all the time, almost on a weekly basis, from people who are architects, businesses, even landscape architects who say, how do I get my work into your tour?
Yeah.
And we say, well, is it interesting? Well, this park here, we put these bushes in, and it's like, I don't know if that's going to make it in.
Right.
We've had people say, we call out my restaurant every time you go by. Well, I don't know if that's relevant. We've had people call us and say, you said this about our building, and we take issue with that. So, we've heard it all over the years, but it's funny. There are people calling and advocate to get what they want into the tour.
Yeah.
But yeah, when the St. Regis went up, we knew about the construction of the building. We knew about the people involved. A lot of it was public information, and we conglomerate what's most interesting and relevant about it, and then that becomes part of our training materials.
That's awesome. Yeah. Coincidentally, I'm filming a podcast episode with Magellan at St. Regis in the next upcoming weeks.
You can ask them about their wind tunnel on the top of the building. There's an open floor which is meant for the wind to just pass. I guess if it didn't exist, there could be some sway. In the building. So
that's awesome.
Interesting.
I'm going to add that to my list of questions. Very, very cool. So in terms of, we've talked about history, we've talked about the different businesses. We keep tying it back to Chicago. So obviously there's a relationship with Chicago.
Yeah.
And then as I think about kind of the community and how it kind of works together, what are some stories that come to mind in terms of either, you mentioned Rahm Emanuel earlier.
Sure.
I do this a lot. I ask questions and I give answers, I think.
No, well, I'll tell you, because I know where you're going with this. So Wendella, we are incredibly vulnerable to good but also bad things that happen in this city. If anything good happens in this city, we're going to benefit immensely. If anything bad happens in this city, we are going to suffer along with them.
What might be some examples?
Oh, yeah. So this has been true always. So, like I said, World War II happened. Chicago is a training ground. We need your boats to be part of this program.
Right.
In the late 1960s or early 70s, there was a massive CTA strike. And we have pictures in our training center, these black and white pictures of people all the way up the stairs and down Michigan Avenue trying to get onto the boats.
Yep.
And the boats are overloaded, and architecture tours are being canceled to get all these people back to the train station when there's this bus strike. Time goes on, and every championship that the Bulls win, the boats are packed as people are coming downtown to see these parades. 9/11 happens, and boats are bringing people out of Michigan Avenue towards the train stations. We get to the Blackhawks parades, and then the Cubs and all that. And then, COVID hits, and we got hit extremely hard by COVID. We were in an industry that could pivot to working at home or offering alternative products.
Right.
So, we really, throughout the course of the city's history, our destiny is intertwined with the city to a degree that a lot of businesses aren't. We can't pack up and move our headquarters to Miami or Texas.
Right.
If something happens in this city that negatively impacts it, if things like rising crime rates, if the media is always going to call that out, then we're going to suffer.
Right.
If the city has something that happens that's good, like the DNC or the NASCAR races, we will benefit off of that. So I really can't speak enough to how intertwined the fate of Wendella is with the city of Chicago.
Yeah.
It's incredibly personal to us. This is home, and the city is really everything to our business.
Yes.
And we have a lot of pride in it. But, in addition to that, what I would say, if I had to talk about a person or particular event, my favorite in terms of an event would be, of course, the St. Patrick's Day celebration.
Sure.
Every Saturday before the official St. Patrick's Day, they dye the river green. The Plumbers Union takes a orange vegetable dye and dumps it in the river, turns it a bright neon green. It's a great cultural celebration. It's a great tradition. It's very unique. They don't do anything like that anywhere else in the world. And people come from all over the world to see it.
Yeah.
And now that we're in this age of digital media, the pictures resonate internationally. People see it and say, oh my God, that's the coolest thing I've ever seen. And even if they're not going to come to Chicago to see that, they're going to come here once they see that picture.
Correct.
Just the city looks so cool. But, in terms of one person, I mean, for my career, it was really Rahm Emanuel. He was the one that put the focus on the river. And it was contentious for a while because what a lot of people don't know is Rahm Emanuel's plan essentially said, we're going to build a river walk on the river. It's going to bring a ton of people down here. They're all going to enjoy the river. You're going to get more patrons. We're going to get more tax revenue. But Wendella is going to pay for this. That was really the deal.
Okay.
And our competitors.
Yeah.
The First Lady that does the architecture cruises. Us and them primarily paid for the loan on that river walk.
I did not know that.
They increased our so we rent land from the Department of Transportation.
Okay.
They came to us for the money. They took out a loan from the federal government. And then once they built the Riverwalk, they monetized the assets of that Riverwalk to continue paying back that loan.
Interesting.
But the money that us and our competitors pay to use those city docks are going to that Riverwalk fund.
Oh, wow.
And we're talking between us and our competitors. I mean, we're talking millions of dollars that go to pay back this TIFIA loan that they took from the federal government. So,
I don't think a lot of people know that.
No one knows that. Yeah.
That is interesting because if you hadn't known that, you can have a little bit of a must be nice to be Wendella in the city doing all these wonderful things.
Sure.
But you have an active role in creating what I thought was an awesome summer experience last summer.
That's right.
Going up and down there.
And the truth is at the time there were some skeptics about this idea of the Riverwalk, but the gravity of Chicago's tourism scene has really shifted from Navy Pier to the Riverwalk now.
Yeah.
And I grew up going to Navy Pier. We all did, but I got to tell you, I've been there recently. It just doesn't have the charm. It doesn't have the energy that it did at one time, and I'm feeling that on the Riverwalk. And of course, the big buzzword we use all the time is authenticity. People want to go to a city and they want to feel like they're experiencing it the way the locals do, and they're not feeling that way at Navy Pier. They feel that way when they're on the river. So.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that might play into that too is Navy Pier is a destination at the destination, right?
Yeah.
You can't, whereas the river, right, is something you can stumble over as you're walking to your wherever you're going that day in the city. And in fact, some people aren't stumbling; they're taking your taxis to get to the other place. It's more integrated, as you said.
They have across from us at Michigan Avenue on the Riverwalk. They have a little like a little mall kind of setup where there's a bunch of little window shops, and the city has awarded these little windows to these very neighborhood oriented, like small businesses, people that like stitch their own clothes from Pilsen, chai vendors from certain neighborhoods. I mean, really kind of cool stuff. So a lot of this isn't even big business on the Riverwalk. These are small pop-up shops, and now they're selling, interesting, clothes on the Riverwalk, or Chicago gear, or chai lattes and stuff, and it's great. So
that is awesome. And I think when we take a look at economic development as well, the big stories. Well, I mean, the Riverwalk is a big story, right? But we get into the big stories such as who's working from home or who's buying the old post office and all that type of stuff. I think it's so exciting. It's almost a new neighborhood. Right, the Riverwalk, in terms of just that entire experience and the people that are going down there. Very, very cool. So I got to ask, so you go on a lot of your own tours, right? Obviously, as I'm learning, a Chicago historian yourself.
Yeah.
What's your favorite? Do you have a favorite story when you're going down on the tour?
Oh, I mean, it depends. I don't know if I'd say I have a favorite story. As a Chicago kind of amateur historian, there's a lot of things I'm very interested in. I love reading about the history of the Great Chicago Fire.
Sure.
And how Streeterville is essentially this neighborhood built on top of rubble that they push into the lake. Fort Dearborn was right where Lake Michigan once was. There's a tribute to it on the Michigan Avenue Bridge right there. All those things are very interesting. We took a water taxi down once with the Army Corps of Engineers to Bubbly Creek, and a lot of us in school read Upton Sinclair's The Jungle about these meat factories that were located on Bubbly Creek, and it was interesting to be there and to see that. But in terms of my favorite stories, I have a lot of funny stories that revolve around just random bits of anarchy we've seen on the river. We have people jumping off bridges when they die. They tried to dye the river blue when the Cubs won the World Series. It didn't work.
Amateurs did?
No, the city did.
Oh, okay.
And it just didn't work. It just doesn't display like the Green River did.
Yeah.
And people were jumping into it and were coming out, all blue like a Smurf. All sorts of stuff like that. We have a lot of good stories. Our crew has rescued lots of people up and down the river. I've been on boats. I've seen this firsthand. When I was a deckhand, I took place in a real man overboard. There's several spots on the river that we go by today, and I'll have memories of doing drills there, training there, of when our crew members have pulled people out of the river there, have rescued people there. There's really a lot of history along the river. And it's really kind of exciting to think about where we'll be in the next 10 to 20 years compared to where we are now, because there is still a lot of land available.
Yeah.
We're talking about building stadiums and casinos and new developments, and we hope these things come to fruition, because if they do, there could be a lot more people down the river, a lot more focus, and I think it would be good for our industry, certainly.
Yeah, 100%. And that brings me to some of my kind of final questions. So you've got a new boat being built.
That's right.
We're talking about trends. We're talking about what we're excited for. If I was to ask a question, what are some of the things that you're excited for in the future of the river and Wendella,
Sure.
some things you're doing, and kind of also in the context of what are some things that the rest of us should be excited about too that you're seeing?
So one of the things we've been doing the last few years is running a year-round operation.
Okay.
So now the boats, historically, when I was in the Marine Corps, we every winter to this date, we bring our boats to our off-season shipyard. It's in Dolan, Illinois.
Okay.
So we run 9 boats during the summer, and then as the fall comes around, one by one they go to the shipyard, and then we shut down entirely for the winter. And then we rehab all the boats.
Mm-hmm.
We're repainting them, varnishing all the wood, overhauling the engines, sometimes repowering them entirely. Then in the spring, the boats start coming back down one by one. So after the pandemic, before the pandemic, we had a plan to run year round, and we did in 2019 into 2020. Of course, everything shut down in March of 2020. I want to say in 2022 to 2023, we started running year round again. Now, instead of bringing all 9 boats to the shipyard, we just bring 7 and leave 2 downtown. And then throughout the winter and spring, we would rotate them out of the shipyard so that there are boats running throughout the winter. And what we found is that, albeit the market is not nearly what it is during the summer, there is still enough of a market that it is still beneficial for us to run year round.
Yep.
The boats are heated. The architecture still looks great. If there's no ice in the river, it's still a great quality of tour. We have a full service bar on the boat. And it's still beautiful. We have these great videos where it's snowing, but it's still beautiful on the boat. You're on the boat and you're going through the snow, and the architecture's there. The buildings are lit up in red and green for Christmas colors, or pink for Valentine's Day. So that's something that I'm pretty excited about, is the year-round nature of the business now.
Yeah,
that is very good for our labor, because now a lot less of our employees are taking time off, are spending time being laid off.
Right.
We can offer them year-round employment to a much greater degree than we were before. We can offer year-round employment to a lot more people than we were to before. And we've turned what was, when I was much younger, a seasonal job into what it is now, but is a great career for someone.
Yep.
Who's interested in the maritime industry but wants to live in Chicago and doesn't want to be on like a container ship or a barge.
Yep.
So
that is exciting. In fact, I guess I did realize, but the year round is something that you don't typically think of when you think boat ride.
Yeah.
And I think that's unique too, especially in Chicago when sometimes there's limited options of things to do.
Yeah.
People still want to go out, right?
Sure. But yeah, so those are things I'm excited about for Wendella is this trend. We're building this new boat in Manitowoc, Wisconsin. It's about an hour south of Green Bay. It'll be a sister ship to our existing tour boat vessels. In terms of the city, what I'm excited about, we have a lot of new developments that I think could really be successful. they're not geared on, people commuting in and working in an office. They're geared more towards entertainment and recreation. I would love to see the White Sox stadium or a stadium be built at Roosevelt on the south side at that beautiful piece of land down there. They have pickleball courts now, but they've been talking about maybe a White Sox stadium or maybe another stadium, which would be fantastic down there. That'd be a huge hit. And Wendella would bring thousands and thousands of people to there every game. They wouldn't have to drive there. Because people could take the metro in from any suburb, and we could bring tens of thousands of them a game to this area. So we could improve the traffic congestion, and we could improve access to that site. We also have a casino on the North Branch that will be great as well. I know a lot of people had some issues with the idea of a casino. I heard a lot of erroneous comments like this isn't going to be good for security, but it'll actually be the opposite. The idea that people are going to go rob a casino is insane to me. I mean, this isn't the 1920s. These casinos are going to have massive security presences, cameras everywhere. They're going to be well lit. There's going to be a lot more traffic. There's going to be police. If anything, it's worse for security now to have an abandoned, broken down factory on this site. But that'll be on the river, and we'll be prepared also to bring thousands of people there a year. So that'll be great too. We'll see what else happens. They're going to add a marina to the north end of Navy Pier. Right now, it's just a road. They're going to bring a marina there. That'll be pretty cool. The Chicago Spire site is going to have something potentially built on it. So this is really from a Chicago perspective, we would just love to see new developments, new markets, and good use of this land around here. And it'll be good for everyone. There'll be more people into the city.
So awesome. And, one of the things I learned today, and I guess I should have thought ahead of time, is it's always clear to me, right, that you're tied into what's happening to Chicago because you're going up and down a river and that's happening around you.
Yeah.
What I didn't really fully comprehend until our conversation today is how involved you are with a lot of those developments. The Riverwalk being the obvious one.
Sure.
I'm hoping someone from the White Sox board who's talking about that stadium is listening to. We could bring tens of thousands of people there.
If you're building something on the river, they do. These real estate developers understand this river is an opportunity, provides access, and it provides an attraction to their building, and we'll help them monetize these river edges there, and it'll be good for their tenants or their customers, and it helps with accessibility too. So
that is awesome.
Yeah.
So, final question for you. So you've got tours, you've got the cruises, got the taxi. If you had to recommend one, what's the quickest path?
I would say it's the Lake and River Architecture Tour. If we're going to take the St. Pat's River Dine, which is more of a one-day event out, it's going to be the Lake and River Architecture Tour.
Okay.
You're going to see the main highlights from the river. It's going to go down around Wolf. It's going to go to about Wolf Point, but you're going to get a good view of the Willis Tower. You're going to see all of the new buildings that are built around Wolf Point. You'll see things like the Merchandise Mart. You'll see all of our beautiful bridges on the main branch of the river, the St. Regis. And then you'll get to see our Chicago Lock, an engineering marvel.
Yep.
Then you're out on Lake Michigan, and we hear all the time people are astounded at how big the lake is. They come from California and Florida and New York, and they think you're going to be able to see across this lake. They just don't appreciate that this is a great lake and it's massive and you can't see across it. And they say, oh my God, this is like an ocean here.
Yeah.
And they see the playpen and they see Oak Street Beach, and they say, we never thought of Chicago as anything other than a landlocked city, but it's anything but.
Oh yeah.
And we introduce people to this third coast, and it's beautiful, but there's no better tour than the Lake and River Architecture Tour. That is the best one.
Noted. That is awesome. And if I wanted to sign up for that today, what's the easiest way to
WendellaBoats.com.
All right.
We have a great website, and go there and buy tickets, and we offer tickets for not only adults, but we offer a child ticket as well. And if the Lake and River Architecture Tour is too long, we have the 45-minute Architecture Tour too. So
awesome.
A shorter one for the kids. It's helpful.
Awesome. Well, Andrew, this is awesome. I feel like I just got a Chicago history lesson. Definite, just an awesome appreciation for. This is the first time I'm going to thank a guest for everything they're doing for the city directly and getting involved.
It's our pleasure.
But this has been awesome. Really appreciate the time.
Yeah, thank you so much.